We're going to start off with Ron DeSantis. I live in Florida. I know. Go ahead. Say your sorries. Go ahead. I know. I know. So he's the governor of my state. A couple days ago, there was a flood, a very bad flood in Fort Lauderdale. In South, if you guys don't know, Fort Lauderdale then is in that South Florida. So in South Florida, there was this flood that happened. And so, make sure. Let me show you guys the article. Okay, here it is. I want to go down to Fort Lauderdale. I've never been to South Florida, even though I've lived here almost all my entire life. Tragedy of being broke and poor. Anywho, so this is from Local 10. It says, frustrated Fort Lauderdale residents remain underwater. And so this says some residents in Broward County are still dealing with flooding issues caused by this week's historic rain. Waters have slowly continued to recede, but it has been a slow process for many, and continuing rain hasn't helped. Inside the Edgewood community of Fort Lauderdale, the streets are clear, but many homes and yards remain flooded. Those impacted by it have been totaling up the value of everything lost, both inside and outside their homes. Quote from Marlise Perez says, everything is damaged. All the appliances, the water heating, everything. The smell is really bad inside the house. Perez says she and her family were able to escape through a window as waters inside the home reached waist level for the adults and head level for children. That's scary, man. And a lot of people are probably thinking, well, if you know there's a flood, how in the world, like, how did you stay in there and, that happens to you where you start to get flooded out? Like, don't you leave, early on? And the thing is like, where? And then on top of it, when it comes to floods like this, like, you don't really know how well these things happen. You don't know how it's going to come about. Like, it could just be a torrential rain. It's not anything that you foresee like a hurricane. And a hurricane, it's like, okay, potential flooding, time to evacuate. When it's just a torrential downpour within a given area, you don't know this. And there's a couple questions that I also have about it too that we need to get into. But when your systems in the city or the county that you live in aren't working properly, the infrastructure, you think that it's working properly until it doesn't. So yeah, so there's a lot of people that can get stuck. And then on top of that, where are you going to evacuate to? A lot of people, a lot of working people, and by working, I'm talking about poor working class. I'm talking about just people who, are workers, people who do not have, the means, to jump and go into a hotel or, jump up and have, $500 just for an emergency, and they can just go, outside the city or outside the state in order to evacuate. A lot of us don't have that. And so that's why whenever people are like, oh, you need to evacuate, it's like, where to? Some of us, our entire families are in that area, or our families are too far away for us to travel to because we don't have enough money to get there. So where to? That's the question a lot of people don't ask. you know. And then on top of it, sometimes flood zones can also be of a lower price because there's not that many people who want to live there, but it's cheap enough for you. Anyway, let's get back to the article. Perez said that she and her family were able to escape through the window as waters inside the home reached waist level for the adults and head level for the children. We are all doing a prayer right before we jump through the window. Across Fort Lauderdale, inside the Melrose Park community, families are dealing with similar situations. Flood water remains in the street several inches high. Neighbors want answers from the city because they believe the drains failed. See what I said about infrastructure? Quote, everything in there is wet. We just installed brand new cabinets, totally damaged. That's from Della Musgrove. Frustration and wanting people to take responsibility and do what they're supposed to be doing, but we can't do that. That's why we have elected officials and people that are responsible. Fort Lauderdale officials spoke Saturday evening, saying they continue to pump waters in neighborhoods like Edgewater. Our engineering staff is analyzing ways to improve the work that 2 or 3 feet of water remains in some areas. Fort Lauderdale officials says they are about to launch a debris removal operation. They also said they are concerned about the standing water that could be attracting mosquitoes. By the way, mosquitoes, they can spread diseases. So that's another thing that they have to worry about. It says they're asking if residents notice a big concentration of mosquitoes to contact the county's mosquito control division. So that's what's going on. And this was said to have been a 1,000-year flood. And this flood has really destroyed so many homes. And let's see. It is terrible because you have all these different people who are workers who they don't really have a means to, they don't have a second home like some rich people do. They don't have anything like that. And what do you expect them to do? You know? That's why it is so important for us to change the system, because the thing is that when things like this do happen, who gets screwed? Not the rich. The rich are fine. It's the poor. The poor and the working poor are always the people who are left out to lurch. This is so imagine being in like a shopping center and in shopping center area, and because you heard that it's flooding, and in that shopping center area where you think flooding may start happening, okay, I'm not going to leave my car at my place because it may flood, and I want to keep my car. So you take it over to the parking lot of a shopping center and you park it there, and then you come back and your car's still flooded. This is a perfect example of individual solutions to a systemic problem. You see, an individual solution would be a person goes and finds a place of higher ground for themselves in order to get safety away from something like flooding, right? But what about everybody else? Because guess what? Everybody else is also experiencing that same issue. And then on top of it, you still have to worry about the issues that everybody else is worried about. You see, I'm in Orlando. It's literally a 3-hour drive away from me. And we experienced flooding, not in our home, but during the hurricanes last year. It was flooding in our street. We could not leave. And me and my family were literally sitting outside. This was like after the strongest part of the hurricane passed over us. And we're sitting, in front of the garage. And we're looking at, because our condo is literally elevated. So they elevated our condo higher. So it's kind of on a small hill. And so we're watching people trying to drive through down our street, and our street's completely flooded. And I guess this car full of people thought that they could just race and go through really fast. And then by the time they got halfway in, the car stalled. And we just looked, because on top of it, you got to remember, it's not just water. There's also could be sewage. And remember, we live in Florida. There are snakes, gators, and lizards. I'm sorry, but I'm not about to get in that water. Now, of course, there was like 3 people in the car. So they were able to push the car out of the water. Plus, I'm a dialysis patient. I can't lift or push more than a few pounds. So I wouldn't have been able to help anyway. But the problem is they got into that situation. But the thing is that if the systems were working properly, would they have had to deal with that? Like, for instance, and this is after construction in my area where they actually rebuilt the storm drain system. So it was brand new, and it still wasn't adequate enough because that hurricane just dumped water everywhere. So yeah. But what of Ron DeSantis, though? What about him? Where was Ron DeSantis? Because a lot of people are asking that question. Let's go to the article. Wait, did I? Okay, I got it. I thought I deleted. I thought I deleted my link. I almost screamed, Mariah Carey style. Anyway, so let's get into this. So this is out of the Miami Herald. It says mayors praise Florida's flood response as Trump-friendly critics rip DeSantis travel. Says workers with the environmental land development company pump out water at the intersection of Broward Boulevard and Northwest 8th Avenue in Fort Lauderdale, still flooded after heavy rain in Broward County for at least last 2 days. And this was 3 days ago. But it says critics aligned with Donald Trump, including the former president's son, attempted to make Ron DeSantis handling a flood in South Florida a political issue on Thursday, attacking the Republican governor for traveling out of the state despite heavy rainfall. The criticism came as local officials in hard-hit areas, including some DeSantis Democrats praised the state's response to storms, which dumped as much as 26 inches of water in parts of Fort Lauderdale and led to dozens of rescues in cars and homes in Broward County. The former president's son, Donald Trump Jr., tweeted Thursday that DeSantis should not have left Florida. Some Democrats joined in as well. Donald Trump Jr. says Fort Lauderdale is underwater and DeSantis is campaigning in Ohio right now instead of taking care of other people suffering in his state. In a broader political context, his attacks against DeSantis aren't unusual. Trump and his allies have regularly attacked the governor for months in anticipation that DeSantis will eventually decide to run against the former president in the 2024 GOP presidential primary. Early hypothetical polls of the race show Trump and DeSantis are leading in the field of potential candidates, often by a wide margin. The governor, in fact, was in Ohio on Thursday as a part of a nationwide book tour that has seen him visit Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, among other places. He is scheduled to visit New Hampshire on Friday, which just passed, a state that holds the GOP's primary second nominating contest. It says that Meyer said the county has not submitted its damages estimates to the state, but the governor's declaration seemingly just came hours after Broward County declared its own state of emergency Thursday. So some people are saying that to not go up against Ron DeSantis because Ron DeSantis declared a state of emergency even though he was outside the state. So you have one side, which is primarily Trump Republicans, saying, oh, no, he hasn't been in the state, so he needs to be there, and he's basically abdicating his duty as a governor, whereas others are saying, no, he's not abdicating his duty as a governor. He's actually doing what he's supposed to do. He declared a state of emergency really hours after the flooding had, came about. So he's actually doing his job. He's just also out of state. And so you have two different sides saying one or the other. Here's the thing. Okay, don't shoot me for this, right? That's what the governor is supposed to do. They're supposed to declare a state of emergency. The fact that he didn't declare it within hours and it wasn't days, standard operating procedure. However, sounds to me like he should have been there at the same time. Like, it's coming. You could have at least postponed. I mean, you're the governor of a state. Come on. So it's kind of a catch-22, but at the same time, it's like, I don't like Ron DeSantis no ways. So, but even still, he did declare a state of emergency. Now, is he going to be down there? I haven't seen any reports on it yet, but I'm pretty sure he's going to go down there because, if he has political aspirations, especially in South Florida, especially with a lot of Republican people that are in South Florida, especially a lot of Republican leaning Cubans, then yeah, I can see that. Now, let's take a look at what Donald Trump Jr. said. It's just to give her more of a receipt. I don't know what it is about Donald Trump Jr., but he looked like the type of kid that always would talk smack about people, and then he will always talk about my father, my father, my father, my father. He just screams that type of person. It's that annoying kid. Anyway, Donald Trump Jr. says Fort Lauderdale is underwater and DeSantis is campaigning in Ohio right now instead of taking care of the people suffering in his state. And then he quote tweets this video. Let's take a look at what they say.
From the treatment plant, but it was all treated water. Never was there ever untreated water discharged into the watersheds.
Have you spoken with Governor DeSantis?
Governor DeSantis has not yet called. I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm sure he's very interested in what's going on here, and we're happy to work with his office. In the meantime, the state agencies we've been working with them. The Fish and Wildlife Office has been working with us, so we appreciate that. I'm not sure the governor himself needs to be involved, but the state agencies have been very helpful.
So he basically said that DeSantis has not responded yet. So that's basically what has happened. Let's finish.
And you said so far there have been over 900 rescue calls. What do you have to say to people that are trapped in their homes?
So basically, by that point, he has been contacted, but no response. But then hours later, he put the state of emergency. So it's like I want to attack him on the state of emergency thing, but I had to be measured and say, yeah. I mean, for the most part, standard operating procedure to do it, especially when you don't know that it's going to cause a flood like that until after the fact. People can't predict things, so it just puts a bad taste in my mouth to give him any type of praise. You know what I mean? Anyway, let's take a look here. Yeah, I just feel bad for all the people down there, man. Okay. Let's take a look.
Flood emergency in southeast Florida, swamped by more than 2 feet of rain, with many still underwater tonight. Sam Brock is in Fort Lauderdale. Sam, what's the situation there right now?
Lester, good evening. The situation right now is that there's still flooded neighborhoods here. This as fire officials have rescued or saved more than 1,000 people so far, as operations, Lester, are still ongoing.
After life-altering levels of rainfall, Fort Lauderdale streets are still filled with parents treading through water and clutching loved ones closely.
I've been here 22 years, so it's the first time I see this happen.
The city counted more than 1,100 people who called for help.
This is a disaster akin to a hurricane strike.
I was scared for the family and everything else.
Luis Alvarez says the torrential turn of events ruined 2 cars and trapped him inside his house for 2 days.
Water come up the first step, second step, third step, and it kept going halfway.
Signs of distress everywhere.
We are a day and a half removed now from the main event here in Fort Lauderdale. There are still people wading through water in the streets. That's how bad it is.
The historic level of rain, 26 inches in 7 hours, left cars littered across the city and shut down the airport since Wednesday.
26 inches in 7 hours. $26 in 7 hours. Imagine going to work and then when you get home from work, your house is flooded. Like, that's how long it just that quickly. That's a lot of rain in a short period of time. 26 inches in 7 hours. You can't. In 7 hours. That's wild, man. Yeah.
Until finally reopening this morning. Left cars littered across the city and shut down the airport since Wednesday until finally reopening this morning. Elsewhere, a record heat wave sweeping across the nation. 113 million people experiencing temperatures 15 degrees above average.
You see, when people talk against climate change, people will say, oh, well, these things happen. The climate naturally changes. It's like, yeah, but does it change this much? Also, on top of that, think about the infrastructures that we have. Our infrastructures that we have do not allow for a lot of water retention in our ground because we have a lot of concrete and asphalt in the areas. So guess what happens? That water stays on top. It doesn't sink and go down into the ground. So that on top of the climate change that we're perpetuating, and y'all wonder why we have heat waves in the middle of April. In the middle of April, I'm trying to calm down. In the middle of April, up north, what's the temperature here today? Hang on. It's 84. It's 84 degrees right now here in Florida. Right? And it's 15 degrees plus above average. Yeah, this is going to be a wicked hurricane season for us in the Southeast. Keep an eye on your loved ones. Keep an eye on me, because this is gonna be crazy. I'm telling you, watch. We are look. If we don't get a hurricane this season, number one, I'll be surprised. Number two, I'll be grateful, because I do not. This is something that I'm like, no. It is. Look, when it's hotter than normal, that means that warm air, those tropical depressions, they start soaking up that warm water. That water starts to evaporate. Next thing you know, they start forming. Start getting that cyclone in the middle. Next thing you know, we got our hurricanes. By the way, hurricane season starts on June 1st. Maybe, just maybe, I'm making a prediction, but I think we're going to start having our first tropical depressions by mid-May. I think hurricane season is going to start a little early. I see it. And you know what's worse is the fact that hurricanes also bring torrential flooding like this. And if hurricanes can dump water like this, just like a regular storm could, there's no hope for that area. Because it's clear that the infrastructure didn't work well. And they're like, well, this is a once in 1,000-year flood. Well, I'm like, well, maybe we should actually tailor our infrastructure to make the climate to not perpetuate climate change so that we won't have things like that. It's funny. Climate change actually contributes to so much damage to the point where it literally hurts us economically. Like, it would literally save money in order to combat climate change. Well, okay. It would save money for workers. I'll put it that way. Because these big corporations, they will make out like bandits just to price gouge you for things resulting from climate change. How's the air conditioning business going? especially the owners of these big HVAC companies. I wonder how they're doing. Carrier their business must be booming right now. Because as temperatures rise, the more people need air conditioning systems. You got to think about these things from the money aspect too. I don't know. My hamster wheels are turning. What do you guys think?
Degrees above average. New York even hitting 90 degrees for a second day in a row, though incoming showers should provide relief. While in Florida, relief came in a different form.
Try his baby seat down.
Stephen Finnegan, visiting from Ireland with his wife and 2-year-old son, was trapped in rushing waters, then rescued by random strangers.
Thankful for good people. It'd make you question your own kindness.
Lives saved by a flood of compassion. Sam Brock, NBC News, Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what's going on in Fort Lauderdale. I'm telling you, man. And the thing is that what makes me scared is that it could happen here in Florida. Not Florida, but in Orlando and in Orange County. Because if it can happen there, then it can happen here. And if it can happen here, then it can happen in South Carolina. It can happen once again in Louisiana. It could happen in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina. All because our infrastructure isn't up to par the way it should be. And what was it? What did they say? They give our infrastructure a grade of what? D minus, or I think it went up to C plus, maybe. But even still, with our infrastructure being as dilapidated as it is, I mean, one of the good things, and I know I talk to, I get responses from Roger Meadows on my channel quite often, but he talks about an infrastructure, a public bank that also helps pay for infrastructure. But really, ultimately, this system needs to be dismantled. Because if we had a truly good central planning model, then we could also centrally plan around making sure that we have top-notch infrastructure in order to take care of, the levees and the storm drains, and, making sure that we have, proper bridges, water treatment plants, things like that. But unfortunately, they don't want that. And by they, I mean the corporate dictators. The corporate dictators don't care. Their central planning model is centered around profit. It's not centered around us actually having what we need in order to not only survive, but thrive.